computer. Okay, it should be recording now. Should be fine.
Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Journey of the Soul. You want to open these books if you don't mind.
Thank you.
So I believe, Alec, you should have gotten your book in the mail already. Irene, you have not gotten yours yet.
I did.
Good. And Irene, yours has not arrived yet. We'll get it soon.
Okay.
For today, I'll share the texts on the screen where we go through them so you can follow along when we go through, especially the longer ones. So before we begin, if you are joining us virtually, you're welcome to interrupt at any time. Feel free to be a part of the classroom. I'm not sure if you can see our fellow students here, but we have Linda, Doreen, Artie, and Irene all sitting here in person, and then online, Irene and Alec. So you can unmute yourself and ask or comment at any time, because I may not notice if you're raising your hand. So please feel free. They tell the story of the guy who was going on a blind date. It's the first time he ever went on a blind date. He's very nervous. What if it goes bad? Like, what do you can't just walk out in the middle, right? So he comes up with a little plan. He tells his friend, I want you to call me at 8 p.m. And this way I can excuse myself from the table for a minute. And if things are going downhill, then I'll just come back to the table and I'll tell her, oh, something terrible happened, I gotta run. And if things are going good, I'll just say, oh, it's my mom, just checking in, and let's keep on talking. Anyway, he's on a date. It's a disaster. He's just bored out of his mind. He's desperate to get out of there. Doesn't want to be rude. So he waits 8 p.m. He gets his phone call. Oh, excuse me 1 second. Let me take this. He goes to the corner of the room. And he comes back a minute later. Oh, I'm so sorry. I feel so terrible. My grandmother passed away. I've got to run. So she says, thank God. Thank God? He says, yeah, had your grandmother not died, my grandmother would have to die. So that's the introduction to the lesson today. So I'm going to say a word, and I'd like to hear your instinctive reaction to the word, death. Not a very pleasant word. What emotions does this bring to mind, and how do you feel about it? So death and mortality. Anyone want to share?
The first word that
Oh, one second, what does it say here? You have been signed out because your account is signed in from another. Okay. You guys can still hear me there? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
For some reason it says I was signed out. I guess I'm still in. Okay. Go ahead.
The first word is end.
End. Okay. End. Okay. Anyone else?
Fear.
Fear. Okay.
Trauma.
Trauma. Anticipation. Wow. Okay. I never heard that one. Okay, good. I like that.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
Anticipation.
I didn't hear that. What was that? What?
Anticipation.
Oh, anticipation. Okay.
New one for me. I never heard that in terms of death, but Artie's always on
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm gonna try set it up next week better where you can see the students also. I don't think you can see all the students that are here personally, maybe better. But Irene or Alec, want to add to that?
Want to answer? I think of the word, finality, just final.
Okay, so we have end, finality, fear,
But
Unknown.
unknown. Okay.
after the word end, I think further, is it really the end?
Is it really the end? Okay. So we're gonna touch upon that today because there's a, Doreen mentioned fear, and there is a real fear of death. And that, to the extent where some people are actually paralyzed by the fear of death, we're going to see it's actually very common to have fear of death, and many of the decisions that we make in life, consciously or subconsciously, are affected by this fear of death. There's a psychological term for fear of death is called thanatophobia, but we'll read together text number 1. So I'll share my screen, and if you want to follow along, if you have the book, it's page number 3. And perhaps we can have a volunteer. Alec, would you like to read for us text on page 3, text number 1? Give me 1 second to pull it up here. Okay.
Page 3, lesson 1.
Yep.
Okay, I got it. Thanatophobia.
Yep, that's the one.
Okay. Mortality has haunted us from the beginning of history. 4,000 years ago, the Babylonian hero Gilgamesh reflected on the death of his friend Enkidu with the words, "Thou hast become dark and cannot hear me." When I die, shall I not be like Enkidu? Sorrow enters my heart. I am afraid of death. Gilgamesh speaks for all of us. As he feared death, so do we all, each and every man, woman, and child. For some of us, the fear of death manifests only indirectly, either as generalized unrest or masqueraded as another psychological symptom. Other individuals experience an explicit and conscious stream of anxiety about death. And for some of us, the fear of death erupts into terror that negates all happiness and fulfillment.
Thank you. So clearly, it's something that affects the way we live our lives. And that's one of the themes we see in this course, that we're not just learning about death, after death, and the afterlife and souls. It's primarily about how it affects us today, because that's what really matters, how we live today. So we're learning this information for how it informs us today. And we see that clearly when it comes to the fear of death, that we do make certain decisions. I guess a clear example is the pandemic. The pandemic has brought the idea of mortality, that we all have a finite time on Earth, has really brought it to the forefront. Many of us are thinking about this a lot more over the past year. And it's something that greatly affects the decisions we make and the choices, as we've seen over the past year. We've made certain choices to protect our lives. Everyone on their comfort level. And no one wants to die, right? It's like the famous story about the rabbi and the priest and the minister who are sitting and hanging out and they're talking, and the conversation moves to the funerals and eulogies and how much they get paid for funerals and all sorts of things like that. And then they start talking about their own funeral. What would you like to see at your funeral? What do you want to hear at your funeral? So the priest says, well, I want them to talk about how charitable I was, how I helped so many people through my church. And the minister says, well, I want them to say how beautiful my sermons were. What wonderful inspirational sermons that brought inspiration to the masses. And the rabbi says, I want them to say, look, he's moving. So that's we all have this fear of death. But just before we move on and kind of deal with that fear, let's just try and understand exactly what that fear is about. What are people afraid of when we talk about death? So I think we mentioned two things already. Maybe you want to add to that. But one is fear of the unknown. I think that was Irene who mentioned fear of the unknown. And then there's also the end. That Doreen mentioned, the idea that there's actually an end. I think Vivian may be out there, so we'll see. If not, it rings again, I guess.
She's
okay. The fear, there's the idea of finality, that we live our whole lives, we build a life for ourselves, we build a home, we build this kind of personality and this prestige, and we work very hard building, and then it all comes to an end, nothing left. And that idea, I think even more than the unknown, horrifies people, right? And we hello, how are you? We need one more chair. I'll get you a chair. 1 second, guys, please. No problem.
Good morning.
Do we know you? We can't see you.
Take your mask down. Oh, yes, good morning, good morning. What did you, we don't know, your name?
Lydia.
Lydia. Lydia.
We're going to give you, is it okay on the show? Questions to get in front of you. Now you can teach the class.
Sorry.
No problem. Okay, so we have this fear of this finality of life, and that's why you have some people, the way they deal with it, I mean, some people just deny it, they don't want to talk about it. And I've seen that where some people, like, they refuse to write a will, they refuse to buy a burial plot or think about, they completely deny, they live in denial, we're going to live forever. And whenever I talk about, let's have a class on these types of subjects, or on why burial and not cremation, we don't want to go there. So they find it too scary and depressing. That's how some people deal with it. Others are obsessed with creating a legacy. So they'll try and build their finances to the extent where they can leave this world and have some sort of monument or something that carries their name forward so that they don't really end. So sometimes you go to the cemetery and you see this huge edifice, golden and silver, and a beautiful thing. And who knows how much they paid for this and invested in this to sit over their grave. And you think, what's the point, right? You're dead. You can't appreciate that big monument, but they want to create this legacy. They really want to live on. So be careful the plug, Hal.
Oh, yeah.
So this is how we tend to deal with this finality. And as I mentioned, it brings a lot of fear for many people. So we want to address this fear today and also see how the ideas that we present can also affect the way we live life. So I think Irene already touched upon one idea that we'll get into, that she thinks about afterlife. But in order to really understand death, we first need to understand life. We need to understand who we are. That's the first step. So we'll look at text number 2. I'm sorry, I don't have enough books. I apologize for that. Let me just share the screen again so you guys can follow along who are doing this virtually. Okay, text number 2 is from Rab Chaim Vital, who was one of the primary students of the Holy Ari. So Kabbalah, as we know it today, was pretty much passed down through the writings of Rab Chaim Vital. And here in this writing, he describes to us how a Jew is meant to, or an individual, a human being, is meant to see himself, that we sometimes perceive ourselves differently than who we really are. The wise are aware that the human body is not the human being. When we speak of the human being, we're referring to the human's inner dimension. The body is merely a garment in which the soul is attired during its sojourn in this world. So the Chaim Vital is saying, don't forget that you have a soul. Well, not that you have a soul. That's not enough. Don't forget that you are a soul. And that's a big mistake we sometimes make. Even within religious circles, even as believers, we sometimes admit, yes, I have a soul. But the point here is not that you have a soul. That's who you are. You are a soul. When I say I love, I feel, all of that is the soul talking. The body is nothing more than the shell that carries that soul. It's the vehicle to which the soul interacts with this world, this physical world. So in other words, we're not physical beings who have a spiritual side, who have a spiritual spark. We're spiritual beings who happen to have a physical side, happen to have a physical body. So we are a soul with a body, not a body with a soul. And that right away changes our whole perspective of who we are. And the more we can really begin to see ourselves that way and allow that to resonate with us, the more it'll change our whole view of life and death, as we will see. Okay, let's take a look now. Let's move on to text number 3 on page 6. So this is a verse that describes a little bit about the nature of the soul, and as we'll see, the eternal nature of the soul. It's from Genesis, and we're going to read how the Torah describes the creation of mankind versus the creation of the animal kingdom, and we'll see if you can figure out the nuanced difference between the two. So it's text 3a. God formed the human of soil from the earth and breathed into his nostrils a neshama, a soul of life. And the human being became a living being. So with mankind, what happens? God forms us out of soil and then breathes the soul into us. In other words, body and then soul. Let's continue with 3b, with the way the Torah describes the creation of the animal kingdom. God said, let the earth bring forth living beings of different species, cattle, creeping things, and beasts of the earth, according to their species, and it was so. So what's the primary distinction between humankind and the animal kingdom? Anyone picked up on it?
The neshama.
Sorry?
The neshama.
The neshama. Okay, so it's a bit complicated because the truth is that we do believe that animals also have a godly spark. Otherwise, they wouldn't exist. An animal wouldn't be alive if it doesn't have a godly spark that animates it. But the point, the real difference is that with mankind, you have a body, an independent body that came from the earth, and then God takes a soul, which is independent of the body, and places it within the body. With the animal kingdom, both are made as one. The body and the soul are really one. Now, if this is the case, if the soul is independent of the body, it doesn't need the body to exist. Or in other words, it predates the body, right? And if it predates the body, then it can post-date the body. Just like it was breathed into us, although it existed before, didn't need the body. So when the body falls away, when it drops the body, it continues to exist, like it did before it was breathed into the body. And this is expressed in text 3c by the Chizkuni, who was a 13th century Torah scholar. It's on page 7. Let me just make sure I have the right place on the screen. 1 second. Okay. God did what he had not done with any other creature. He blew into Adam with his Holy Spirit a neshama that is immortal and does not perish when the body does. So we've said two important points that we need to keep in mind. And I think this is where Irene was heading to before. Number one, that I am a soul. You
I
mentioned.
said at the end, I thought at the end.
Right. Oh, you also said post the end, you thought, right? That's what we're kind of getting to.
I
After
said
that.
fear. Yeah, I said and you said.
Okay, whatever.
Yeah,
it doesn't
I
matter.
whatever. I said finality of soul.
Right. Anyway, the 2 points we need to get we've built so far is number one is recognize that you are a soul that has a body. You're not a body with a soul. Number one. That's my soul. Number two is the soul is independent of the body, and just as it predates the body, it lives after the body also. So if you think about it, the body doesn't really live. It kind of tags along with the soul. The soul gives it life. It never really lives. That itself already informs us that death is not what we necessarily thought it was, because you see the body, the person died. Who died? The soul doesn't die. And the body was never alive to begin with. The body was just tagging along. It was getting its life from the soul, but it never really was alive independently. It's not like something that was a living creature came to an end. It was tagging along with the soul. Now that the soul's moving on, it returns to its source in the earth. Okay, so those are the first two important points. Now we're going to kind of dig a bit deeper. Not only does the soul continue to live, the truth is we'll see that the soul doesn't even want to necessarily be in this world. Doesn't even want to live, we say living in this world. Let's take a look at text number 4. This is on page 8. 40 days before the conception of a child, God summons the angel in charge of the souls and tells him, "Bring before me a certain soul that is now in paradise. Its name is such and such, and its appearance is such and such. This is possible because all the souls that are born into this world were created on the day the world was created and exist until the end of time." When we say God created the world, with that God creates all the souls, and they're in heaven until God says, "Okay, you're the one, time to go down." Yes, I mean.
I thought the soul has an appearance. It said its name is such and such, and its
Appearance is such and such. That's a great question. So Irene is asking, why do we say in this text that the soul has an appearance? So we're obviously not talking about a physical appearance. We're talking about a character, a look, a certain uniqueness. Every soul is actually unique. Not all souls. We think of all souls like one big, all like rays of light and all the same. It's not true. Every soul is very, very unique. And that's why our physical look actually often reflects physically the spiritual look of the soul. So you may have a soul that's more in tune with kindness, one that's more in tune with discipline, one that's more in tune with creativity. Every soul has its unique features, so to speak. But let's continue the text, because that's a bit of a side point. The angel goes and brings the soul before God. The soul, and I should also point out, a lot of this is anthropomorphic. It's not like the angel literally goes and schleps the soul from one place to the next. We're giving examples, we're using terminologies that we can understand, but the idea is the same, that when it comes time for the soul to come into this world, there's an angel appointed over bringing the soul into this world. So the angel goes and brings the soul before God. The soul bows and prostrates itself before the supreme King of Kings. God instructs the soul, "Please enter the seminal drop that is currently in the hands of the angel in charge of pregnancy." The soul protests, "Master of the universe, I am quite satisfied with the world I inhabited since the day you created me. I am holy and pure, hewn from your throne of glory. Why do you wish to cause me to enter this putrid drop?" So if you read, this is the Midrash, so it's from Talmudic times, so it's pretty early Jewish teachings, and we see clearly that the soul's not very excited about this. Heaven is great. Why on earth would I want to go down there? He looks down here and he sees us. Not for me, right? The soul has no interest in being here. So not only does the soul live eternally, it seems like its life up there, its life before and after, is a lot more life for the soul than it is when it's down here. Let's take a look at text number 5, a similar theme, and this is from Pirkei Avot. The world is like a corridor before the world to come. Prepare yourself in the corridor so that you may enter the palace. A single moment of bliss in the world to come is greater than all of this world. So it's painting a picture of how the soul looks at life. Or when I say life, I mean life in this world, life as we know it, right? It sees that nothing more as a corridor. It's a finite world. I'm really looking for the palace. That's what I'm really aiming for. And in addition, just one moment of bliss in heaven is greater than everything in this world, all of this world. So this paints a picture of a soul that really has no interest in being here. So what does this do? Let me just close the door for a second. Extra noise over here. So my question to you is, if we really internalize this idea, again, I'm a soul that has a body. My soul is eternal. And my soul's not even that interested in being here to begin with. How does that affect my fear of death? What are your thoughts?
Pretty good.
Pretty good. Who said it? It's pretty bad. Go ahead. You can share with us why and how.
Oh, gosh. Well, if we're afraid of dying, then that means we're focusing on just that, and then we're missing out on the moment that we are not here.
You can speak up a little bit more because they probably want to hear your wisdom online. No, okay. But I think when you said pretty bad, what you're saying is, in other words, it reflects on me poorly if I'm afraid of death because I'm not really realizing what life is about. Okay, so that's, in other words, what it does is, in a sense, so this idea really kind of alleviates or lessens the fear of death. When I realize that I'm really a soul and my life is eternal and not so that everything comes to an end. That's it, I'm gone. I continue to live, and in a better way than I did before, I'm not as afraid, right? Now, we're not going to get into here when our loved ones pass on, God forbid. That's a different story, and that we will touch upon later on in different weeks. We're talking about this fear that we have of our own death and how we should view our own death. Any questions before we move on?
Well,
Just curious, I mean, is this actually true or a Bubelmeister so that we don't fear death as much? I mean,
So it depends. So Linda asked the question, is this true or is it a Bubelmeister so that we shouldn't fear death? So this is a discussion I really have with Alec quite often because we get into discussion about results really what matter at the end of the day. In other words, Linda's really pointing out, maybe it's just the results that the Torah cares about. It doesn't want us to fear death. The only problem with that is that Torah is a Torah of truth. There isn't one word of Torah that's false. So Torah doesn't just say things to make us feel comfortable. The Torah says what it is, as it is. And the truth is sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes it doesn't make us feel comfortable. Sometimes what the Torah says makes me very uncomfortable, but I accept it as truth. In this case, we're fortunate that the truth is also very comforting. So we're lucky that it's comforting, but not always is it. Sometimes it's tough.
And in connection with that, if you
Is this my water?
do not believe in God, and you know your whole family believes in God, but let's say you individually, and you actually know you're dying, you know. So,
How do you deal with that?
right.
Okay, so Doreen asked a good question. What if someone does not believe in God? So the truth is, this fear of death is very real for someone who doesn't believe in God because everything comes to an end. There's nothing left. And that's a very scary thought that this is not me. No one's going to remember me. I'll be forgotten from the world forever. And it's like a very scary thought. But I want to point out, when people say they don't believe in God, they don't necessarily mean they don't believe in God. Or as a rabbi once said to someone who said they don't believe in God, it's the God that you don't believe in, I don't believe in either. In other words, when people say they don't believe in God, they say, I don't believe in a God who's like an individual, a person, a thing. But the truth is we don't believe that either. So the same person who says, I don't believe in God, may admit or believe in the fact that we are more than a physical beings. Many people are spiritual, they're not religious, and they believe in the fact that we're not just physical beings made up of chemical reactions. Even now in science, there's a lot of discussion about the mind, that there's more and more evidence pointing to the fact that there's a mind that transcends the brain, the physical brain. So whereas until now, science would stop at the brain. That's it, there's a physical brain that fires off neurons and electrons, and that's what makes us feel and think, and there's nothing more than that physical reality. And now scientists realize that there has to be something more. We call it the mind, or in Judaism we call it the neshama. So someone said, I don't believe in all this stuff. Yeah, but you believe in the mind, that there's some sort of spiritual being in there. So my point is that we say we don't believe in God doesn't mean we don't believe in this stuff, by the way. That even when people say they don't believe in God, often do believe there's something that lives on. There's more to me than my physical self. It's really the terminologies that they don't like. The way we talk about God, they don't like. As if there's some sort of being who's going to hit me over the head if I sin. And the truth is they're right, because God isn't a being, and he doesn't hit us over the head if we sin. So if they really understood God, which even I don't, then they'd probably agree that there is a God. But anyway, let's move on. But these,
a recent experience, so that's why
it's common. Right.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, so now there's this one little issue that comes up now. You see, what we've really said is that I'm really a spiritual being. I'd rather be in heaven. So, you know, actually, there's a great story about this priest who was giving a sermon one day about the beauty of heaven and how heaven's the glory of God. And he says, and you know, the path to heaven is by doing good deeds, and I'll teach you how to do those good deeds and to believe in who knows what. And he says, who here wants to go to heaven? And the Pope raises their hand, says one guy in the back is not raising his hand. So he got, who wants to go to heaven? Who wants to come to heaven with me? Oh, raising the hand is one guy. He's still, see, you don't want to go to heaven? The guy says, what's the rush? Right? I want to go in a long time, not now. But the truth is, why don't we want to go now? If it's so beautiful, if it's so much better than this life, if this life is nothing more than a corridor to get to the palace, then wouldn't we want to go the sooner the better? And can you think of some cultures that do think that way? Can you think of any religions or cultures that do, in a sense, embrace death or venerate death and are perfectly fine cutting their life short in order to make it to heaven early, however you make it to heaven?
No, but we say may you live to 120.
Right, we say that. Can you think of any cultures or people? So I'll give you one example. There are terrorists, right?
Oh, yes.
Islamic extremists,
Yeah.
they believe that if I cut my life short now from some holy act of killing other people, God forbid, then I go straight to heaven and get my virgins, and life is much better. In other words, there's a culture that actually values death more than life. And based on everything we've discussed so far, it seems like that should be the case. That we really should value death, because life here is nothing. It's meaningless. It's just a corridor. The whole world to come is worth more. At one moment, the world to come is worth more than the entire life, right? And we said the soul doesn't want to be here to begin with. And let's see, and at the same time, we all know this is not true. I see Artie is shaking his head because he's right. We all know that Judaism treasures life. We say, Ad mea ve'esrim, till 120, right? We know this is part of our being a nature. We know how much we value life. You look at the extremes that Israel goes to protect one life. So this is part of the Jewish culture. And let's just make sure that this is actually a legitimate part of Jewish culture. In other words, maybe we're getting it wrong all along. Maybe we started to worship life, and really we shouldn't. Because based on the text that we read so far, there's no question that it doesn't seem like there's anything to value down here. So let's make sure that there is this concept of valuing life in Judaism. So we'll look at text number 6.
Page 12.
Okay, page 12. Okay, here we go. If a non-Jew attempts to force a Jew to violate one of the Torah's commandments with pain of death, the Jew should violate the commandment rather than be killed. Because the Torah states concerning the mitzvot, a person shall do them and live by them. One should live by them and not die because of them. So this is codified in Jewish law by Maimonides. It says in the Torah, you shall live by them, live by the commandment. We just read this in the Torah recently. What does this mean? So the codifiers say this means that if you have a choice, someone says, commit this sin, otherwise I'm going to kill you. So you may say, one second, committing this sin violates my spiritual nature, violates my soul, violates my relationship with Hashem. Give up life. Who needs life? Is nothing. Give up the body. Drop the body. Let the soul remain intact. Comes along the Torah and says, no, even though it may be counterintuitive, protect the body over the soul. It's a drastic statement. Protect the body over the soul. Let the body continue to live, even if it sacrifices the nature of the spiritual nature of the soul, that it'll taste sin in this way.
But there's another thing. What if someone tells you to kill someone, otherwise you'll be killed?
Right, good point. So Irene's pointing out there are actually 3 cardinal sins. There are 3 different sins regarding which we do say you should better give up your life and commit these sins. But those are the exception to the rule. Out of 613, there are only 3, and each one has a specific reason. For example, murder. If someone tells you, murder so-and-so, otherwise I'm going to kill you, you're not allowed to do it because why is your blood redder than his blood or her blood? So there's a specific reason in those 3 cases. But the general theme is, violate the mitzvah, allow your soul to taste sin in order to protect the body. So we see Judaism as a culture of life. We need to explain this because it seems like a contradiction. Number 2, text number 7. We're going to read now the second half of the verse. We spoke about the story in the Midrash about the soul resisting coming down to earth. The soul says, I don't want to go down there. It's horrible down there. So then the Midrash continues. How does God convince the soul to go down? God hurries to reassure the descending soul. The world to which I am bringing you will prove more beneficial than the one you presently inhabit. So the soul, you're making a mistake. You think heaven's so good? Better down there. Indeed, I formed you exclusively for the purpose of creating mortal life from this particular drop of seed. With that, God forcibly installs the soul. So now we have a little bit of another way of looking at it, right? It's a bit of a contradiction. At first he said, well, the next world is better. Heaven's better. And the soul doesn't want to come down here. God comes along and says, no. Down there's better. It's more beneficial. Go down there. So now we understand why we have this culture of life, right? We protect life. God says, better down here. So we want to stay down here to 120 minimum. That's our demand from God, right? But how do we reconcile these two? On the one hand, we're saying this world's a corridor. One moment of bliss in the world to come is worth the whole this world. And then we're saying all of a sudden, no. This world's where it's at. God wants us to be here. It's more beneficial here. We want to continue to live. So how do we reconcile the two? Let's continue just to and this will kind of bring us to the answer. We quoted before from Ethics of Our Fathers, that verse where it says, one moment of bliss in the world to come is greater than all this entire world. Right? All of the life down here. That very same Mishnah continues. It's text number 8 at the bottom of page 13. A single moment of repentance and of good deeds in this world is greater than all of the world to come. Right? So this clearly says, oh, down here is better. But we do have to understand this inherent contradiction in the same Mishnah. One line says, the bliss of the world to come is greater than this whole world. And then we say, one moment of repentance and good deeds in this world is greater than the whole world to come. Can you make up your mind already, right? How do we reconcile these two? So Artie's going to give a crack at this. Go ahead, Artie.
Well, this world is an opportunity, it's potential. If we use it, this world will be greater than the world to come. If we abuse it, it won't be.
Okay, so good. Thank you, Artie. So Artie's response is that it depends what we do with this life. If we waste our life, then heaven's better. And if we succeed, we do the right thing in life, then this life is better. The only issue with that is that means that if I'm succeeding in life, then I'm better off here than in heaven, and I have what to fear of there. So you're right, but we're gonna kind of make that a bit more nuanced. And I think the key is when you look at the two halves of the Mishnah, one moment of the world to come is greater than this whole life. And one moment of mitzvot in this world is more than the whole world to come. We're going to add 2 words, purpose and pleasure. One moment of bliss in the entire world to come is more pleasurable than this entire life. And that is true. Even if we do well, that's what the nuance I wanted to point out. Even if we do the right thing in this world, the pleasure in the world to come is far greater. You can't compare it. Happens to be that life isn't so pleasant in this world. There are ups and downs, right? Heaven's beautiful. There's no question. Even if you do mitzvot all day long, the soul will have more fun in heaven. It doesn't like being down here. It's not comfortable. Uncomfortable for the soul to be here, even while doing a mitzvah. It's still uncomfortable, right? But which one has more purpose? Down here. So one mitzvah, one moment, do one good deed. You simply take a dollar and put it in a charity box. That has more purpose, more meaning, carries more weight, is greater than the entire infinite life of the soul in the world to come. Because the soul in the world to come cannot do a mitzvah. It can't fulfill the very purpose of creation. So it's more pleasurable, but doesn't carry the same purpose.
So when they say that we have a purpose in this life, solve life purpose to be here? Does it mean that there's another purpose?
So a good question. So Lydia's asking, if I have a purpose in this world, what does it mean for anyone's soul? Not my own soul, after 120 years, what's it doing in heaven without a purpose? So the truth is, there's two stages to life. There's when we do the work, and there's when we reap the benefit, we get the reward. In Olam Haba, the next world, is when we get the reward for the work we did in this world. So that's why the soul, on the one hand, in heaven, has tremendous pleasure, and it's enjoying the pleasure because of all the good work it did, but at the same time, it does miss something from this world, which is why we want to stay alive. We don't want to death or get too soon. That said, we'll see in future lessons, that's why we have the ability to give purpose. When we're still alive, we can give purpose to the souls in heaven, but we'll leave that, that's the next lesson, so we'll touch upon it. Okay, let's take a look at text number 9 that focuses on this idea about that soul having purpose specifically in this world. This is from the Talmud, Tractate Shabbat. God created the universe on a condition. If the Jews accept the Torah, he told the universe, you will continue to exist. If they do not, I will return you to nothingness. So when we say God created the universe, we don't just mean earth. We're talking about everything. When God created the angels, the souls in heaven, God created paradise, Olam Haba, the next world, when God created the sun, the moon, the stars, earth, everything was created on a condition. For the Jews to keep the Torah. Where do we keep Torah? Where can we actually physically keep the Torah? Only in this world. Right? The mitzvah of the Torah, eat matzah on Passover, you can't do that mitzvah in heaven. You can only do it down here. So therefore, during life, is the only time we have that purpose, even if it's more pleasurable afterwards and more, so to speak, more fun afterwards. So this is how we kind of reconcile these two ideas, where on the one hand, the soul says, I don't want to come down. Why not? Because it's painful down there. It's not pleasant. But God still says, that's where you belong. It's better there for you. In other words, because that's where you find your purpose. We reconcile these two ideas. We also reconcile why the Mishnah says, one moment of bliss in the world to come is better than this whole world. It is. It's more fun, more pleasurable than everything you can possibly do in life. I don't care how many steaks you eat, how many vacations you go on, all of that doesn't come close to one moment of the pleasure the soul gets in the world to come. That said, the Mishnah continues, but one mitzvah in this world is greater, carries more weight, has more purpose than the entire infinite life or afterlife in the world to come. So this explains an interesting Mishnah in Ethics of Our Fathers. It's text number 10. And Linda will take a question in a moment if you want to ask something. Let me just scroll down. Text 10. Let's try. Stop. Here we go. Okay. Text 10. Against your will, you are formed, and against your will, you are born. So that we understand. The soul doesn't want to come down here. It's against the soul's will. But then the Mishnah continues, against your will, you live, and against your will, you will die. That just like we didn't want to come down, we also don't want to leave so fast. We're not afraid of death, because we know life continues after, we know it's a better life. But when we don't want to leave, we treasure life because we know this is where the action is. This is where we can accomplish something infinite. And that's where we can balance the beautiful culture of life that Judaism has. We treasure life, but we don't fear death. And that's a nuanced approach, because you do have cultures in this world who venerate death. They're not afraid of death. Many of Islam, or at least in extreme Islam, are not afraid of death. That is beautiful. But they don't treasure life. There are other cultures that don't believe in afterlife of the soul, so they obviously treasure life because that's all there is. But then it's a very depressing way to look at every existence, because it comes to a crashing end after 80, 90, 100, 110 years, 120 years. And Judaism has this more nuanced approach where we can value and treasure life because of its purpose, but at the same time also not fear death, because we recognize as a soul and that the afterlife is more pleasurable than this life. Linda, you had a question or comment?
Yes, so, so this soul that's already up in heaven, is that from some other person's body that's left the world? That you're, the soul that's up in heaven, that you're trying to convince him to come back into another body.
Oh, okay.
So in other words, is this like a reincarnation kind of situation?
Okay, so as of now, no. We will touch upon reincarnation. I think there's a whole lesson in this course of reincarnation.
Okay.
But as of now, there's a soul that's created at the beginning of time,
Okay.
and it's my soul dedicated to me, and it comes down to my body of birth.
Okay.
We will touch upon reincarnation later
So
on.
so there's a soul that's existing already up there
Correct.
that we're trying, but it's, right now, we don't know, it's created, and we're trying to convince it to come.
God convinces it, God forces it to come down to this world.
So I have a question. So have all souls already been here, or are there some souls that have not come down yet?
Great question. I'll tell you why. On the one hand, it does say that Mashiach will come in the Talmud. I think it's quote from the Talmud. Mashiach will come when heaven is emptied out of souls, when all the souls have had the chance to do their job. Otherwise, it's unfair. The soul is created. I'm having a great time in heaven, but I never got a chance to go onto the front lines. I want to do battle. I want to go out to war. So every single soul has to be born, which is why there were rabbis would say, every time you have a child, you're bringing Mashiach closer, very literally, because you're giving this soul a chance to come into this world. At the same time, there's a tradition that it's very rare for a new soul to come into this world. Most of our souls actually are reincarnated. And I don't want to get into jumping ahead, that's lesson 5 or 4 or something.
We all one soul.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Isn't there just one soul?
So we will touch upon that also, that we all come from one soul. The truth is we are also distinct. I have my own personality. I am who I am. So we'll get into how there's a balance between the two. It's not so, it's a bit nuanced. It's nuanced.
There's an expression, you're an old soul.
You're an old soul, right?
Yeah.
So it's a simple idea. So the belief is, Alec, that most of us really are not new souls.
Uh-huh.
How that reconciles with the idea that heaven has to be emptied out of souls, I'm not sure.
Mhm.
Where have you heard that? I never heard that before.
And
And also because of our age?
because of sometimes you think that person has some innate knowledge.
Yeah, so sometimes you see, also sometimes you see a child and
Yes.
they have an old soul, they have a certain depth to them
Yes.
that's not typical for children. So you say to them, well, you have an old soul. You're like, as if you lived 80 years already. There's some children like that. They're unique in that way. They're very, as if they have all of life experience.
Intuition, they're.
And then they have wisdom and experience.
But they're born with a gift already.
Basically.
One of my grandchildren,
Intuition.
yeah.
Right. It's more than, it's also a certain wisdom, a certain depth of wisdom that usually comes with age.
Like you, I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, most of us as kids, all you want is we want lollipops, have fun, run around, tease our brothers and sisters, and then you have these deep souls that just they're interested in different things, and they're more spiritual and more sensitive, and so we call it an old soul. But it's not a Jewish thing,
Or the characters unique for them.
right? Yeah, it's not a Jewish thing. It's a term that people use.
We like that, uniqueness of an individual.
Right. But let's move on. I don't get carried away. So there's a great story
We'll do
about
that later.
that really illustrates this point. The previous Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzhak Schneerson, lived in communist Russia before he went to Poland and then moved to America. And he was arrested in the 1920s. He was arrested by the GPU, which predated the NKVD. And they were interrogated. He was arrested for being a counter-revolutionary or for spreading Judaism. And at one point in the interrogation, the interrogator was getting a little frustrated that he wasn't getting the information he wanted. He wasn't intimidating the previous Rebbe the way he was used to intimidating people. So let's read the story together. It's from the Rebbe's diary, the previous Rebbe's diary. It's text 16 on page 11. Text 11. Text 11 on page 16. I arrived for interrogation at the offices of the Soviet GPU. However, in keeping with my principles, I was not very cooperative. One of the interrogators raised a revolver that sat on the desk before him. He looked me in the eye and mockingly said, "This small toy has incredible powers. It causes principles to melt away. It opens mouths. Under its spell, even mutes have become talkative." I responded, "You are quite mistaken. That toy only has an effect on faint-hearted non-believers, those with one world and multiple gods. We, on the other hand, have one God and two worlds. As such, I don't panic at the sight of your toy. It has no effect on me whatsoever." So, of course, the previous Rebbe wanted to live. There's no question about that. He embraced life and wanted to live. But that said, he says, "I'm not afraid of death." Who's afraid of death? Those who have many gods. In other words, they serve everything in this world: money, power, fame, and only one world, this life. So they fear death, because at the end of life, all that money, fame, power comes to an end. But those of us who have one God, we serve one Hashem, and there are two worlds, the world to come, I have no fear of death. So the story really expresses what we've discussed until now. Similarly, there's an interesting story in the Talmud that now kind of makes sense to us of how we look at death. It's text number 12 on page 17. Let's see if I make this a little bit bigger.
You got it?
Okay. Helps. So it's text 12. When Rabbi Judah the prince fell ill and lay on his deathbed, Rabbi Chia entered and found him weeping. My master, exclaimed Rabbi Chia, why you weep? Was it not taught if one dies smiling, it is a good sign for him, while weeping, it is a bad sign for him? In other words, Rabbi Chia comes in and says to the rabbi, you're crying? I thought you were a spiritual being, a spiritual person. It says in the Talmud, if you die smiling, it means it's good for you. You realize that who you really are. You lived with a soul, and therefore you realize it's not so bad that you're passing on. But if you die crying, it means you missed the whole point. You don't understand what life is all about. So Rabbi Judah replied, I weep because of my inability to study the Torah and observe the commandments after death. He wasn't afraid of dying because things come to the end. That wasn't his fear. He has no problem with it. He's not even afraid of dying. He's only upset that he will no longer have the opportunity to do a mitzvah. That's the one thing that's lacking for the soul in the next world, which, as I mentioned, we'll touch upon next week and how we can deal with that next week. So this, as I mentioned, takes away a little bit of our fear of death, but more importantly, it also affects the way we live life. When we begin to really understand ourselves or see ourselves in this way, we live life a little bit differently. And to understand this, let's take a look at text 13. It's on page 18. Text 13, page 18. Okay, text 13. After this from the Talmud, after their demise, tzaddikim, righteous people, are referred to as being alive. So what do you think this means? What does the Talmud mean that the righteous person is considered alive after they pass away? In what way are they considered alive? Anyone want to take a crack at this? Irene or Alan, I want to include you. What is it?
Memory.
Their memory, okay. Their memory lives on, okay. That's one way of looking at it.
What they,
Their good works, what they've done, I guess. You know.
Okay, Lydia said the same thing, that good work, thank you, Alec. That good work lives on. Okay, but that's a little cheap because that's not really living on. I'm dead, my memory lives on. My work continues. So yeah, it's kind of, that's what saying, it's symbolic, it's metaphoric. But let's try to read this a bit more literally. Right? Can we read this literally? After the demise, righteous people are called being alive. How do we read that literally? It's very simple in a sense. In what way are they dead? They have a soul. The soul is living. The soul was alive when it was in this world. The soul was alive before it came to this world. The soul continues to live. The body never lived. We discussed this before. The body only was tagging along, was being brought to life by the soul. So in what way are they not alive? Of course they're alive, right? A tzaddik after his passing, a righteous man after his passing, is alive because the soul continues to live. We can read it very, very literally. But there's a problem that arises. If you read it literally, what's the question? Let me repeat the sentence. Tzaddikim, the righteous, are referred to as being alive, or add the words, because their soul continues to live. What's the problem with this?
we don't see it,
Okay, but it's still true.
right?
It's still true. So I'm asking, what's the problem with the Talmud? Why righteous people? And my soul, I'm not so righteous. My soul is not alive anymore. Why does it say righteous people? It should say people, every soul, every person. After their demise, human beings or people are referred to as being alive. Why only tzaddikim?
They taught us a lesson that it's not so good to be,
Yeah,
that to be something, so.
okay.
You'll see it, I don't know how to explain it.
Okay, so let's see if we can understand it better by looking at text number 14 on page 19. This is from the Alter Rebbe in the book of Tanya, or Igeret HaTshuva, his letters of repentance. This is the founder of Chabad. The life of the tzaddik, the righteous person, is not corporeal, but spiritual. Okay, so we're saying the life we mean when he's alive in this world, life as we know. Okay, so when a tzaddik lives in this world, what's his life about? Is it about his car, his job, his money? Nah, none of that. It's a meaningless thing. His whole life consists of faith, reverence, and love of God. This reality is reflected in the following passages. Of faith, it is stated that tzaddik lives by his faith. Of reverence, it is stated, reverence of God produces life. Of love, it is stated, he who pursues charity and kindness will find life, and kindness is rooted in love. So the tzaddik, while he's alive, his life is really a spiritual one. The tzaddik really gets it, that I am a soul who has a body, and the body's nothing, it's just a shell, it's like a glove. I'm like a hand wearing a glove. So the tzaddik hardly even acknowledges the body, it just feeds it to keep it alive. The bare minimum has no really interest in that. His whole life is spiritual. So what happens when the body passes on, when the soul leaves the body? What changed? Not much. The same love continues, the same spirituality continues, the same faith continues. Very little change. What about another person? Imagine a person lived his whole life all about the physical. Life is all about money, fame, power, just things you can touch in your hand. He never once gave a thought to spirituality, to the soul, to God, to love, to peace. Anything that's intangible, he has no interest in. What happens when he passes away? That all comes to an end. Everything that he considered life is over. To illustrate further, a cemetery in Hebrew has two different names. It's called a Beit HaKvarot, a burial place. It's also called a Beit HaChayim, a place of life. Well, which one is it? Is it a burial place? Is it where things come to an end? Or is it a place of life where things live, things continue to live? Which one is it? It depends for who. For a person who lived his whole life purely physical, never tasted spirituality, no, you bet it's a burial place. Everything you live for is over. True, the soul continues, but he never was about the soul. So his life very much comes to an end. On the other hand, for the person who lived a spiritual life, it's a Beit HaChayim, it's a place of life. Life continues. Or another name for a cemetery is a Beit Olamim, a house of eternity. For this person, it's a house of eternity. So now we understand why the Talmud says it's specifically tzaddikim, righteous people, who are called alive even after their passing. Everyone's soul continues to live. But for them, it's literally alive the way it was in this world. And there was nothing really changed. The same love, fear, faith, all that stuff continues exactly as before. So this really tells us something about the way we should live our lives. In other words, why invest in things that do come to an end if we can invest in things that are eternal, that we can take with us? If we are afraid of an end, then don't do as many things that have an end. The more we do things that have an end, the more we have what to be afraid of. The more we invest in things that have no end, the less we have to be afraid of. This explains the famous line in the Torah where it says, I have given you life and death. I place before you life and death, right? And the Torah says, God says, choose life. Duh. But what kind of commandment is choose life? Who wouldn't choose life? Right? What is the Torah really saying when it says choose life? So let's take a look at the next text on text 15 on page 20. And this is how the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Chabad Rebbe, explains the concept of this idea of choosing life. Behold, I have set before you today life and goodness and death and evil. Choose life. The term life in this verse does not refer to corporeal life, nor does death refer to the result of the soul's departure, for which simpleton needs to be instructed to choose to live. Rather, each creation, while alive and fully existent, contains both life and death. This is a beautiful idea. Everything has life and death. The physicality of the object is intrinsically lifeless. Like we discussed, the body itself inherently is lifeless. It's a piece of, it's flesh and bone, it's nothing. It is in a constant state of decline and deterioration. As a result, it always is deteriorating. Anything physical slowly deteriorates. Think about it, it's actually very depressing that the moment we're born, we start getting older, right? We go downhill pretty much from the moment we're born. But that's the nature of the physical body, and anything physical, not just the body, food, your house, everything physical slowly deteriorates.
Animals as well.
Animals as well, yeah.
Yeah, so do animals go to heaven too?
Let's finish this point. We'll get to another story. We'll touch upon it very briefly because everyone always asks the question about animal heaven. We observe this decline in every physical object as well as in ourselves. Our physical capabilities and our powers weaken with time. By contrast, the spiritual and divine within each thing is alive, eternal, and not subject to destruction or deterioration, God forbid. So we really have a choice now. when we interact with anything, whether it's ourselves, the people around us, or things, we can choose to interact only with a physical, corporeal existence, which is really about death, choosing death because it comes to an end. Or we can choose to focus on the spiritual aspect of it, its content, its purpose, the good that can come from it, and then it becomes eternal. We can take it with us forever. So take something as simple as a piece of steak, right? It's a piece of meat. What is it already, right? So you get all excited. I'm going to a fancy restaurant. They shell out $100 for this fancy steak that they massage before they slaughter the cow. And who knows what they have on the steak that they pay a fortune for. Yeah, you actually massage the meat before the cow before they slaughter it to make sure it's relaxed and whatever it is. So I pay a fortune for the steak and it tastes delicious. How long does that pleasure last? 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Usually by the time we leave the restaurant, we're doubled over. Oh, I'm so full, I can't move. I feel disgusting, right? You feel disgusting afterwards. It's very, very temporary because that's the nature of the physical. And when we only interact with the physical aspect of the steak. But then I can look at the steak and say, okay, well, there's a godly spark here. God brought this into the world. There's got to be some positivity here, something good I can do with it. What can I do with a steak that's positive? I don't know, you tell me. What can you do positive with a steak?
Say a blessing over it at least.
Say a blessing. Okay, that's a good start. Say a blessing. Another thing, you know what I'll do? I'll invite my good buddy. I haven't spoken to him in 2 years. Maybe we had a little fallout. I'll invite him to the restaurant. We'll have a steak together. We'll rebuild our friendship. So I use the steak for something positive. So the taste of the steak itself, the pleasure of the physical body, how long will it last? 5-10 minutes. The friendship, the love, the mitzvah that I did to bring two people together, how long does that last? Forever. Even in this world, we know how long when we do something good, we feel good for years. We feel good after about that mitzvah we did, right? The truth is, the neshama feels it for all eternity. So that's what it means. Choose life. That's exactly what it means. When you go through life, constantly choose life. At every moment, we can choose life over death. And going back to the story of the previous Rebbe, when the previous Rebbe said, "I'm not afraid of that gun." Because only those who have many gods and one world are afraid, but I have one God and two worlds, I'm not afraid. It was more than the previous Rebbe saying, "Oh, you know, by the way, I'm not really afraid of it because it's afterlife." It's a lot more than what we're really saying is the previous Rebbe was saying, "This is the way I always lived. My whole life was about spiritual matters." So in a sense, he was saying that you cannot really kill me. You can't kill me. I'm my soul, right? Life, when you think of life as before or after death, right? And what we're really saying here is life is really beyond death. The body is always dead, the soul is always alive. Life is beyond death. Life never dies. And that's what the story really is all about of the previous Rebbe. So just to recap very quickly, we'll do a quick review, because we're running late. So if we're afraid of the end, the finality, there's two things we can do. Number one is we should contemplate the nature of our soul. Contemplating the fact that we are a soul that has a body rather than a body with a soul will alleviate and lessen some of that fear of finality. And in addition, we should do things that are more eternal and less final, and invest in things that have no end, and that will also help. But it's important to point out that it's not all or nothing. It's not like either I'm a physical person and I fear death, or I'm a tzaddik and I'm a spiritual person and I'm beyond death. It's not all or nothing. There's a continuum, right? And you can, as we live a bit more spiritual, as we invest more in life, we recognize what life more is. The more we do that, the more we see the world in a different way, we see life in a different way, the less we are afraid of death. Let's do the review with the key points. Let me just get it ready on the screen. Lesson 1. No, that's not the right one. It is this one. Okay. Good.
Lesson 1. Demystifying Death. 1. The awareness of our mortality and the resulting natural fear of death influence many elements of our psyche, behavior, and life choices. Our perspective on death influences multiple areas of our lives. 2. The neshama, human soul, the true essence of the human being, is eternal. It precedes the body and continues to exist after the body is gone. While still in heaven, it does not desire to descend into a body. and when the time of death arrives, it resumes its native spiritual state. 3. The fact that the briefest spiritual experience of the next world is more pleasurable than all of this world does not diminish the reality that even a brief stay in this world is more important than all of the next. Therefore, Jewish law gives precedence to preserving life over nearly every mitzvah. 4. This perspective allows us to appreciate and value life without fear of death. 5. While our corporeal needs and endeavors die with the body, our soul-focused aspirations and actions live on eternally. Thus, when we live and identify with eternal values, our current life continues even after the body's demise.
Okay, thank you for joining us, everyone, especially the virtual students. You're lucky you don't have to deal with parking. So you have a step up over everyone else. We're going to continue next week, and God willing, Irene, you'll get the book, and Lydia will get a book next week. Let us get books. And next week's primarily about the process of the soul leaving the body, at the moment of death, after death, and how we relate to the soul and how the soul relates to us after passing. So hopefully we'll see you next week, same time, same place. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.